Welcome back. I am Abyss. Please have a seat. It was January and I was renting out a winter cabin that was by an ice fishing lake. It was a very small bare bones cabin with only the essentials and was only there for people like me who like going out to the lake for fishing or ice fishing. I'd usually bring a friend along with me, but sometimes I went by myself and never had any issues with it. I had planned out 3 days there with no other real plans in mind except sitting out by the lake and fishing. On the first day when I got there, I set up my things in the cabin and made myself at home brewing some hot coffee and relaxing by the fireplace for most of the afternoon. This cabin was only a single room, so the bed, fireplace, and everything else was all in one area. Anyway, I fell asleep early and woke up at 7 a.m. to go out to the lake. It was about a 10-minute walk from the cabin down a short forested path that was entirely covered in snow. Once I reached the lake, I found a good spot and got my things situated, drilled into the ice and started fishing. I find it to be really stress releasing to just sit there and fish. Though I do know a lot of people find it to be boring. I stayed on the lake for several hours, probably 3 or 4, then packed my things as the snow was starting to pick up and the wind was getting heavier. I walked off the lake and back onto the path, but immediately noticed a set of footprints in the snow going alongside mine from earlier. They went right up to the edge of the lake I was at, then turned around and went back down the path toward the cabin. Feeling a little uneasy that someone was out here and had been right behind me, maybe watching me, I chose to follow the prints and see where they led. They mostly went along with the path, going right back to the cabin, but instead of going up to the cabin, they veered off into the woods. As far as I could see, they continued in a straight line, going through the trees. Even more confused and slightly nervous, I went back inside the cabin and warmed up by the fireplace. There was nothing else out here for miles from what I was aware of, so anyone being out here was just odd, especially in the winter. I made food and stayed in the cabin for the rest of the night, keeping the fireplace running and mostly just reading. But about an hour after sunset, I heard movement outside, a very light crunching in the snow, but in the recognizable pattern of someone walking. I moved over to the window and looked, instantly seeing a figure out by the trees, walking toward the path. They were wearing thick clothing, covering every part of them, making it hard to get any details on what they looked like. Once they got to the path, though, they turned and started coming right for the cabin. I ducked my head down, now just listening to the footsteps getting closer and closer until they were right up to the wall. The footsteps moved to the side, coming right up to the window I was hiding under. Their shadow moved around like they were peering inside the cabin, but then they stopped. I tilted my head up, seeing their eyes staring right back at me. I jumped away, now standing a few feet from the window as the person quickly tried to lift it open. I ran and grabbed a nearby knife, but after a few more attempts at opening the window, the person ran off. I watched their figure disappear into the snowy woods, going in the same direction I'd seen them come from. After that, I packed up and ran for my car, leaving the area only a few minutes later. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but they knew I was staying there after seeing me at the lake, and willingly came back in the middle of the night to try and break in through the window, so they definitely had something horrible in mind. Luckily I got out unharmed, but I have a feeling that that night was close to being my last. For years ago, I rented an Airbnb to stay in for the holidays. I was seeing my family for the week of Christmas, so I got a place that was just a few miles away. When I arrived on December 20th, everything was exactly as I thought it was. The place was a very regular house in a very normal neighborhood. Overall, I was satisfied. I got in there around 6 o'clock on that first day, though, and I didn't feel like going out to see anyone until I got a good night's rest, so I stayed in and relaxed for the rest of the night, watching some TV and even getting a little bit of work done as well. I got in bed just before 10 and fell asleep, but in the middle of the night, I slowly woke to a noise coming from downstairs. I was still half asleep and didn't even check the time, but it sounded like a few small thumps against the wall coming from somewhere in the house. As I listened to the noises, I didn't really feel worried or anything, but rather just thought that it was the house making these sounds. I only stayed awake for a minute before drifting into sleep again, and I don't recall waking up any other times during the night. By morning, I had forgotten and didn't even think about those noises I was hearing. Again, I was pretty sure it was just the AC unit or something. Anyway, I let my family know I'd made it into town and we got our plans set for dinner at their place. I relaxed at the Airbnb for the whole morning and afternoon until I was ready to head out. I grabbed my bag and keys, then walked up to the front door to exit the house. But when I opened it, I was face to face with the man standing right in front of me on the porch. It completely caught me off guard, and I just stood there looking at him for a second before even saying anything. "Can I help you?" The man didn't knock or ring the doorbell, which made me start thinking of how long he could have been standing there for and just why he was here to begin with. He didn't respond to my question, though, and instead just nodded, then walked away. I watched him go down to the sidewalk and just continue walking down the street until he was gone. I can't see any situation where this wouldn't be strange and creepy. Why was he at the Airbnb? And for how long was he standing there without knocking? I made sure the place was locked up, then drove to my parents' house for dinner with the family. I brought up the situation as an interesting story, and everyone else seemed to think it was just as creepy as I thought. Dinner was still nice, and we had plenty of other great conversations, catching up on life and everything. But that whole night, I couldn't stop thinking about that man, and if my things I'd left at the Airbnb were going to be stolen or something. I ended up leaving the dinner get-together around 9, and getting back to the Airbnb 15 minutes later. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the front door, looking around for any obvious signs of someone having been there while I was gone. But I didn't see anything. I unlocked the door and stepped in. I walked down to the end of the hallway and into the kitchen, dropping my keys and bag on the counter. But then there was a sudden thump. It was just the same as the ones I'd heard the previous night. But now that I was downstairs, it was far louder and clearly coming from one side of the house. I slowly stepped into the room near where the sound was coming from. But then the thump came again, from a door right next to me. I jumped back, getting a surge of adrenaline, and then after staring at the door for a few seconds, I could hear the faint sound of heavy breathing from the other side. I grabbed my keys and ran for my car. I still didn't know exactly what was going on, but I was not going to stay to find out on my own. I called 911 and waited for them to arrive. When they did, I watched them go in and search for a few minutes. Then they came out and told me something horrifying. The door the person was behind was the garage door, which showed signs of distress from the person likely trying to break the lock and get inside. Unknown to me, there was a side door connected to the garage that led outside, which had been left unlocked by whoever had stayed here before me. I didn't ever plan to use the garage, so I never checked it. Whether the man I'd seen on the porch was the same person that was in the garage is unknown, but just knowing that I was asleep while someone was right below me trying to break into the house is terrifying. What they were trying to achieve after breaking in, we have no way of knowing. Shortly after that, though, I went and stayed at a hotel for the rest of the week, but I still find myself thinking about that situation even for years later. Drunk when I was in high school. I had just turned 16 and got my driver's license, and my parents were always wanting to start offering delivery. I didn't want to be a waiter or work at the register, so driving sounded like a good option. When this happened, I had been doing deliveries for a few months, so I was pretty comfortable with it. It was a Thursday around 8 that my dad gave me in order to deliver. I got in my car, which was actually my mom's SUV, then started the drive. Google Maps said the house was 25 minutes away. Our town was small, so 25 minutes away was actually pretty far. As I drove, I started to recognize the area as being on the edge of town, and I still had 10 minutes to go. I'd never been this far out in this direction before, so I was definitely paying attention and keeping my eyes open. I wasn't scared per southeast, but just felt uncomfortable. The only houses I was passing now were farmhouses far from the main road. When the directions told me to turn, it was down along a paved path going straight to one of these farmhouses. Now I was starting to get a little freaked. A farmhouse this far out at night was probably the last place I wanted to be, but I knew I was probably just spooking myself and it was just a simple delivery. I drove down to the end of the path, which ended and just became a small grass field in front of the house. It wasn't clear whether or not to drive on the grass, so I just parked the car there and got out. It was eerily quiet. All I could hear were my footsteps on the grass as I walked up to the house. The porch light was on, but no other lights were on inside the house. I was looking over my shoulders constantly and walked quickly. The longer I was out there, the more uncomfortable I was. Just before I reached the porch, I heard something. It sounded like it was coming from the backyard behind the farmhouse, but it was loud like a wooden door opening. I stepped onto the porch and dropped the bag on the doorstep, then rang the doorbell and started rushing back to the car. I was regretting how far I parked and wished I just drove on the grass, and as I listened to the only sound of my footsteps under me, I started to hear more footsteps running behind me in my direction. I turned around and saw 3 men sprinting at me through the grass. I tried to run back to my car, but in seconds I was tackled to the ground. One of them held me down while another started taking everything from my pockets. I was yelling and screaming for help, but I knew nobody could hear me. It all happened really fast, and once they looted my pockets, one of the men kicked me in the stomach and they all ran and got in the car, turning around and driving away. I got up and just watched the headlights disappear on the long, empty road. I had no phone and no way to get back. I didn't know what else to do than just start walking toward the road. When I reached the road, I started walking down the way I came. I had no way of telling time, but I think I was walking for 30-40 minutes before a patrol car pulled up in front of me. My parents had called for them to check on me because I wasn't responding. The son of the cops found a small barn behind the farmhouse with another restaurant delivery bag inside it. They think they tried to do the same thing to someone before me, but probably missed their chance or chickened out for some reason because there were no other reports. The actual owners of the farmhouse were out of town, so they had no involvement. My phone was able to be tracked though and was found thrown in a field off the side of the road not too far away. The stolen car, however, took 3 weeks to be located. It was found nearly 400 miles away and had been almost entirely emptied. This was almost a year ago now, and those 3 men that attacked me still have yet to be identified. For Postmates 3-2 for days a week, depending on my other work schedule. Delivery driving is my relaxing side job that I do to help pay for extra things I want, like vacations or clothes, while my other job pays for my more necessary bills, like rent. So I never take delivery driving this seriously. I just go about it, and if I don't end up making a lot of money one night, it's no big deal. On this day, I started right when I got out of work around 8. By 10, I had actually made a decent amount of cash, more than most nights, although I'd usually stop around this time. Why call it quits when I was doing well? I decided to keep going until I either got too tired or the order stopped coming in. I accepted the next order and continued to the restaurant. It was a medium-sized order from Wendy's, with a regular tip, nothing uncommon. I drove through and picked it up, then clicked start route on my phone to give me directions to the customer's house, except it wasn't to a house. It was a GPS location set near a grocery store 15 minutes away. I had plenty of deliveries ordered to grocery stores or other places of work from the employees, but it was only odd because they didn't put the store as the address. They used an exact location instead. Anyway, I started to drive up there. When I got to the parking lot by the grocery store, I noticed it was empty. I pulled right up to the front and parked, then got out with the food. I took a look around, but was pretty sure the store was closed. I texted the customer, letting them know I was at the store. They replied right away, saying they were around the building in the back, and that I should see them right when I rounded the corner. I was definitely skeptical, but I got back in my car and drove around the store. There didn't seem to be anything there, just a couple parked cars in the far back by one of the other stores. I stopped and looked, but still didn't see anyone. This was when I started to get a really uneasy feeling. I was thinking this may not be worth it, and put the car back in drive, but then my phone started buzzing. "Hey, we're coming up right now. Be there in just a minute," a man said. hanging up right after. I looked around again, feeling even more uncomfortable. Something just wasn't sitting right with me. I made a short U-turn and started to go back the way I came, until someone ran in front of my car, holding their hands out in the stop motion. I braked, and they came up to my window. "Hey, you have my order?" I grabbed the bag and rolled down the window, handing it to him, but he didn't take it. I felt dumb, holding the bag out while he just looked at me. Then I heard a quiet footstep from the other side of the car, before the back door suddenly swung open. I dropped the bag outside the window and floored it, as the guy by window yelled at me to stop. I guess whoever was at the back door had jumped into my car as I pulled away. He reached forward, trying to shift my car into park, but after failing a few times, he jumped out of the moving car onto the pavement. I saw him get up, and both of them running away as I turned the corner and got out of there. The police were of no help, saying they would do what they could, but never giving me any updates. I was stupid to have fallen for their trap, but I don't think I was the only one. Doing some research, just 2 weeks before my incident, a delivery driver went missing during an active delivery in a nearby town. There were no leads on what happened, as the driver's car was never found either. I think this might have been those same two men doing something terrible that I can't even begin to imagine. For more than a few seconds as I began getting paranoid. It was something about the silence as well that made it more uneasy, only hearing the wind outside my car and nothing else. Then after 3 minutes of waiting, I saw a figure walking toward my car. He was down the road, coming from the direction where the headlights had been. I watched him as he slowly made his way through the snow, getting to just about 15 feet from the front of my car. Then he stopped. He stood there in the snow, facing me, but not moving. I couldn't see much of him as he had a hoodie covering his face, but the way he just stood there in my headlights started to terrify me. After a moment, I honked my horn softly a few times, just to let them know that I was in the car and that I could see them. They still didn't move or acknowledge me, but just as I was pulling out my phone to call my dad again, the man turned around and walked away, disappearing down the road. I still called my dad to let him know about this really strange person that was out here, and he said he was just a minute away. I stayed on the phone with him this time, and only 30 seconds later, I saw headlights turn on down the road and begin moving toward my car. Once they were right across the road, they parked and turned off their lights. I couldn't see over the ditch, but I heard a door open as I yelled through the phone what was going on. But then my dad's car pulled right in front of my view and screeched to a stop. I heard him yell at someone as they got back in their car and sped away. They didn't come back, but my dad said the guy was holding something in his hands that looked like he was going to break into my car with. Everything went okay after that though, and the car ended up not even having much damage to it. I'm not sure what was about to happen that night, but I know I'm really lucky to have not found out. I work as a mechanic for a car shop in my town. It's a locally owned and run repair place that started up many years ago. The shop runs out of an old warehouse and has a bunch of broken down cars and pieces of cars sitting outside in what we refer to as the scrap yard. It's just the name we give it. Most of the scrap yard is just cars waiting for parts. Anyway, my job for the past 2 years has been to order and keep track of stock that goes in and out. And the best time to do this is when it isn't busy. So overnight, I guess I kind of doubled as a security guard because it wasn't uncommon for crazy people and teenagers to jump the fence and try to mess with or steal stuff from the scrapyard. On this night I got into work at 8, talking to my boss for a bit before he left, and then it was just me in the warehouse. It was raining outside, so inside the building it was really noisy, but also calming away. I did my usual routine of going through the orders that the mechanics had sent in and checking what had been used during the day. There was nothing out of the ordinary still off the covers, but the cars needed to order very specific parts, and for one of them the mechanic didn't write down the model year, which sometimes can be really important. I got up from the desk and walked through the warehouse, looking for this gray Nissan Versa so I could confirm what part to get, but as I got to the end of the warehouse I still didn't see it. I sighed, knowing it had to be in the scrap yard, which of course was on the one day that it was raining out. I went back to my desk, and after a brief coffee break I grabbed my jacket and flashlight and went to the back door. The rain seemed to have picked up since I was last outside, but in the distance I could see the car I was looking for hiding between a few other vehicles. I stepped out into the rain and started walking over, turning on my flashlight. As I got about to the center of the scrapyard, though, a sudden movement from something in front of me made me stop in my tracks. It was at the edge of the light, and I wasn't exactly paying attention, but it looked like a person moving from behind one of the cars. The rain covered up any sound I would have heard, though, so I just stood there and held my flashlight up, waiting for any more movement. "Hello? I saw you already? Just get out of here," I yelled, hoping it was just some kid messing around. I took a few steps closer to where I'd seen them and yelled again for them to leave the property. I didn't see anything, so I moved closer and started to look around the whole area, but whoever was there must have left already. Honestly, I was relieved that I didn't have to call the cops or do anything drastic. I quickly walked over to the Nissan and got the model year, then jogged back to the warehouse and went inside. I took off my jacket and sat back at the desk, filling out the rest of the info and sending through the order. I was there for another half hour, filling out more of the order requests. Then I had to do the stock counting in the actual warehouse part of the building. By then it was probably 12:30 or 1 a.m. I walked along the shelves and checked what everyday products and parts had been used up. While making my way down the first set of shelves, a sudden thud rang through the warehouse, and the lights went out. I stood with my eyes wide open, staring into the abyss of dark. I couldn't see anything, but between the sound of the rain hitting the roof and the sound of the wind blowing through the leaves, I could hear the sound of a car. I was in a hurry to get to the warehouse, but I was too late. Late. Okay, that's it. Thanks for your listening. I just started telling stories on YouTube. If you like my story, please like this video and subscribe my channel. I will make more story for you.